They said I'd never walk again, so my own parents dumped me like I didn't matter, like my life was over. They told people I was gone, as if I'd died. But what they didn't know, the one man they never respected, my grandfather, left me everything. Now they're back, on their knees, begging the same useless cripple they once threw away. But this story isn't about revenge. It's about truth, betrayal, and what I found hidden in a paper crane. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe, drop a comment to let us know where you're listening from, and get ready, because they thought they'd buried me. They had no idea. I was still breathing. It was supposed to be a warm evening, a rare gathering, the kind of dinner families only manage to pull off once in a while, after life gets busy, after people start choosing work or vacations or excuses. But tonight, everyone was there. Dad at the head of the table, his new wife, my stepmother, perched beside him like a decorative figure. My sister and her husband both dressed like they just stepped out of a catalog. My brother, freshly tanned and always talking over someone. And then there was me. I came in slower than I used to. Crutches don't exactly glide across hardwood floors. I was determined not to make a scene, so I leaned them gently against the side of my chair, sat up straighter, and tried to ignore the way everyone subtly paused when I arrived. The roast was good, too good, like someone went out of their way to make this night memorable, but not in the way I'd hoped. My father barely looked at me. He mostly stared into his glass or smiled at my sister's husband, Alan, who had just started some nonsense about early retirement. "It's all about hustle," Alan said, cutting into his steak. "If you're not moving, you're dying." "Well," my brother added, grinning at me, "some people don't really have a choice." I smiled. Thinly, let it pass. My stepmother chimed in. "Jareth, sweetie, maybe don't lean your crutches on the table. We don't want them knocking over the wine." She laughed like it was harmless, like she was helping. I didn't say anything. I moved the crutches. The silence after was longer than it should have been. The salad passed around. Alan talked about how fitness kept his mind sharp. My sister nodded as if she understood a single thing he was saying. I chewed slowly, wondering how much longer I needed to pretend this felt like a family dinner. Then Dad stood up. He tapped his glass, gently, like this was a wedding speech. "Before dessert," he said, "I want to share something." I glanced up. Everyone did. Even the kids had stopped bickering over their screens. Dad looked directly at me. For the first time that night, "It's time for a new chapter," he said. "A fresh start for all of us." I knew what was coming before he said it. Something in my spine stiffened even before the words landed. "We've made a decision. Jareth will be staying in assisted care from now on, full time. It's what's best for everyone." No one moved. No one looked at me. Just the clink of a fork falling. Alan raised his eyebrows, then took a sip of wine like this was some HR announcement. My sister didn't blink. My brother cleared his throat, then looked down at his plate. I stared at Dad. My father. The man who once taught me to ride a bike, who cried when I left for basic, who waited outside my hospital room after the first surgery. "Is this a joke?" I asked. Quiet. Too quiet. "We talked it over," he said with the tone of a man who believed he was being generous. "It'll be peaceful there. They have professionals, structure. It's time to stop pretending things will go back to how they were." No one defended me. Not a word. I looked at my crutches. I didn't reach for them. Instead, I put both hands on the table and pushed myself up. Slowly. My legs ached. My body wasn't ready, but I stood anyway. No rage. No shouting. Just silence. I looked around that table, memorized every face, the way Alan smirked behind his wine glass, the way my brother twisted his napkin like it was a nervous tic, the way my sister avoided my eyes entirely. I didn't say goodbye. I walked out of that house, one careful step at a time. As I reached the hallway, I heard my mother's voice, soft, almost casual. Well, that was easier than expected. I didn't go home that night. Not to the guest house, not to the rehab center. And instead of heading back toward town, I turned the wheel west, away from the lights, away from everything. The air was cooler out there, thinner. The road turned to gravel before long, then dirt. I kept going. No radio, no thoughts I wanted to entertain. just the hum of the engine and a memory buried deep in my gut guiding me forward. Somewhere past midnight, I pulled up to an old wooden gate half swallowed by brush. Most people would have missed it in the dark, but I knew where it was. Hadn't been here in over a decade, but it was as if my hands remembered even if my mind tried to forget. I reached into the glove box. The key was still there, tied to a faded leather loop with the initials HM burned into it. My grandparents, Harold and May. No one had touched this place since they passed, no one except me. The lock gave a soft click. The gate creaked open like it was waking from a long nap. I pulled the car in, shut the engine off, and sat there for a moment. The cabin stood at the end of a short path silhouetted by the lake behind it, still, dark, and completely untouched. I stepped out, boots crunching the loose gravel. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. A raccoon darted across the path as I reached the porch. When I unlocked the front door and pushed it open, the hinges didn't even squeal. My grandparents always oiled them, said a quiet door meant fewer goodbyes had to be loud. The place hadn't changed, not one bit. Same plaid couch, same yellowed wallpaper with hand-drawn flowers from decades ago. The mantel above the fireplace still held that worn wooden cane, Grandpa's. I walked over to it slowly, eyes scanning the photos along the walls. Pictures of me fishing, building tree forts, sitting between my grandparents on Christmas morning. None of those photos ever made it to the family albums back home. My parents had a way of erasing things that didn't serve their image. But here, it was like the past had been waiting. And I picked up the cane, turned it over in my hands. Carved underneath was something I'd never noticed before. Walk your own path, even if no one claps. It hit me harder than I expected. I sank onto the couch and let my eyes wander across the room. The ticking clock, the blanket Grandma used to knit under, the tea tin still half full in the kitchen, everything preserved like they knew I'd come back. Eventually, I don't know how long I sat there, just breathing, letting my shoulders drop, letting the weight of the dinner earlier that night loosen its grip. The silence here wasn't cold, it was comforting, like the kind of silence you earn. My mind drifted back to the first time I stayed here alone with them, after my first surgery, when I couldn't even walk 10 feet without help. Everyone else acted like I was broken. Grandpa handed me that same cane and said, "It's not about walking fast, it's about walking steady." Grandma just squeezed my hand and said, "You're still all here. That's enough." They were the only ones who saw me, really saw me, after the accident, and they never treated me like a burden. I rose and walked to the old writing desk by the window. One drawer was locked, but the key had always been taped to the underside. I found it, opened the drawer, and inside was a sealed envelope with my name in my grandfather's handwriting. The seal cracked as I opened it. The letter was short. "If you're reading this, it means they gave up on you. But we never did. The house, the land, and the trust belong to you, and only you. It activates the moment they declare you incapable. That word may strip you of rights in their eyes, but not in ours. This is your home. Stand tall. Love, Grandpa." My hands didn't shake, but my heart did. I leaned back in the old rocking chair by the back window. The lake shimmered under the moonlight. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I had to explain myself to the walls around me. "You believed in me," I whispered to the dark. I just forgot how to believe in myself. I sat there long enough for the chill to creep into my shirt, but belief alone doesn't stop nightmares. And that night, mine came walking. The cabin was still. The only sound came from the trees brushing against the roof and the faint creak of wood settling. I'd finally drifted off on the couch, the cane resting beside me, my grandfather's words still ringing quietly in my head. But sleep didn't bring peace. It never really did. Somewhere in the fog of unconsciousness, I was 17 again, legs light, lungs burning with hope, sprinting around a high school track. My teammates were ahead. The sun was hot, bleachers full. I remember scanning the crowd, faces blurred except for one. My father. He wasn't clapping, wasn't even watching the race. He was speaking to another parent, calm, clear, and cruel. "If he ends up crippled, don't expect me to carry his dead weight." The words struck harder than any fall I'd ever taken. In that instant, my legs buckled. In the dream, I stumbled hard, face first into gravel, blood on my knees. Hands scraped raw and no one helped. No teammates, no coach, no family. Everyone just walked past like I was invisible. I saw my mother's back as she followed my father down the bleachers, her purse swinging neatly by her side. I shouted, but no sound came out. Not a cry, not a whisper, just the sting of their indifference. I was still on the ground when the sky cracked open. A clap of thunder yanked me out of the dream. My body jolted upright. The living room was dark, except for the glow from the old fireplace embers. My shirt clung to me with sweat, and my fists were clenched so tight, my nails had drawn small half-moons of blood into my palms. I let out a slow breath, shaking the image from my head. The storm was rolling in for real now. Rain pinged lightly against the windows. I stood, legs stiff, and limped toward the kitchen. My knee throbbed with the kind of ache that reminds you your body remembers things you'd rather forget. I turned on the tap and splashed water on my face. It didn't help. I caught my reflection in the window pane above the sink. At first it was just me, disheveled, tired. But the longer I looked, the more I started to see him. My father. The same jaw, the same hard stare, the same tight mouth that never quite softened. Was that all I'd become? I pressed my fingers against the glass and whispered, "Am I really broken? Or just bent differently?" I stayed like that for a while, leaning on the counter, listening to the rain. Eventually, I made my way back to the living room. I didn't want to go back to the couch. Instead, I knelt down in front of the old cedar drawer beside the bookcase. It hadn't been opened in years, maybe longer, but I knew what was inside. I slid it open and pulled out a dusty, leather-bound notebook. The cover had dried petals from my grandmother's garden pressed into the surface. She used to write to me in it, her version of letters without stamps, just quiet words in quiet places. I opened the first page. Her handwriting, careful and looping. "Jareth, you are not your scars. You are the way you keep walking in spite of them. Keep writing, keep thinking, keep being." My eyes stung. I kept flipping. Each page carried a message, some simple, some deep. Notes from years ago. Encouragement tucked between reminders to eat and rest. A life raft on paper. And then I found a blank page. I hesitated for only a second, then reached for a nearby pen and started writing. Not a journal entry, not a complaint, a statement, a decision. Useless. Fine. Let's see how useless I really am. That was it. No dramatics, no long-winded venting, just quiet resolve. I closed the book, exhaled through my nose, and leaned back into the rocking chair. The storm was still humming, but inside me, something had shifted. That fire wasn't roaring yet, but it had definitely been lit. And then, at 6:04 a.m., the knock came. 3 short taps I'll never forget. And I was still in the rocking chair, notebook balanced on my thigh, when I heard it. 3 short taps, steady, deliberate. But it wasn't coming from the door. It came from the floor. I sat up, still groggy, unsure if I was imagining things. The sound came again, not wood creaking or rain dripping. This was different. Hollow, intentional. Like something beneath the house was trying to speak. I set the notebook down and stood, steadying myself on the cane. My knee barked at me, but I pushed through, following the sound across the living room. It led me to the corner wall where an old bookshelf stood, dusty and worn, crammed with old field journals and weather almanacs. I remembered something then, something my grandfather once told me when I was barely tall enough to reach the doorknob. "The truth is buried where lies fear light," he'd said, tapping the floor beneath that very shelf. I never asked what he meant. Back then, I thought it was one of his riddles. Now it felt like a map. I reached behind the shelf and tugged gently. It resisted, then groaned as it slid forward just an inch. Enough to see the outline of a metal hatch set into the floor, half concealed by time and dust. My fingers found the latch, but it didn't budge. Instinctively, I looked down at the cane. It wasn't just sentimental. I twisted the handle, and the base unscrewed with a soft click. Inside was a slim, iron key. My pulse quickened. I fitted into the lock, and the hatch opened with a reluctant creak. A narrow set of wooden steps led downward. Cold air rushed up to greet me, damp and earthy. I grabbed a flashlight from the wall hook and descended slowly, heart pounding. The smell of cedar and mildew filled my nose as I reached the bottom. It was a small space. Bare walls, a concrete floor, and in the center, a heavy metal drawer built into a low table. A single chair sat beside it. I sat down. The Kane's key fit the drawer too. It clicked open. At first, all I saw were letters. Bundles of them, bound in string. All written in my grandmother's hand. She'd been gone nearly 10 years, but I recognized her neat cursive instantly. I opened the top one. Jareth, if you're reading this, then something's come undone. I hope it's not too late for you to know the truth. My hands trembled as I read through them. Each letter peeled back another layer. She wrote about how my parents had accessed accounts under my name while I was in rehab, how they'd claimed I wasn't mentally capable of managing money. There were bank statements showing debts consolidated under my identity. I recognized none of the charges. None of the signatures were mine. One letter described a meeting between my father and a family lawyer where he insisted I'd given verbal consent to transfer assets. Another detailed a visit from a social worker who was turned away by my mother saying, "He's not ready to talk to strangers yet." Poor thing still wets the bed some nights. My throat tightened. Beneath the letters were documents, not copies, originals, loan agreements with forged signatures, a medical affidavit falsely claiming I had the cognitive function of a child, tax filings I'd never seen with my name on them. Each page felt like a punch to the chest. I sat in that chair for I don't know how long, hours maybe. The flashlight beam dimmed. The world above felt miles away. I remembered a moment, something small, stupid, my father laughing with his friend Ron from the bank one Thanksgiving, whiskey in hand. "The kid won't even know his name, let alone sign a check," he'd joked. I hadn't understood it then. Now it landed like a slap. I wanted to scream. Instead, I laid each document out on the table one by one, took out my phone, began photographing everything front and back, organized them by date, by type. I wasn't thinking about revenge, not yet. I just wanted to have proof. Because if they ever came back around and tried to call me useless again, I wanted something solid in my hands. Let the courts decide what useless looks like, I muttered to myself. Near the bottom of the drawer, tucked in between two legal folders, I found something that didn't fit. A paper crane. It was yellowing from age, fragile at the edges, but I knew it instantly. My grandmother used to make them with me when I was little. We'd sit by the window folding quietly. She said they were wishes, messages we didn't have to say out loud. I stared at it for a long time. Then I slipped it into my shirt pocket, close to my heart. When I finally climbed the stairs back to the main floor, the sun was just beginning to peek through the trees, casting pale light through the windows. The storm had passed, but something deeper had broken open. I didn't call the police. I called the one person Dad was always afraid of. I tossed the phone on the passenger seat and slid behind the wheel of my grandfather's old truck, still dusty from storage, but it fired up with that same throaty rumble I remembered from childhood fishing trips. The bench seat smelled faintly of tobacco and pine. As I pulled out of the cabin driveway, the gravel crunched under the tires like a voice clearing its throat before something important was said. The drive to George Wells' place took about 40 minutes. His house sat just outside a sleepy Carolina town where gas stations still had rotary phones in the back and every third mailbox was rusted shut. I passed fields of soy and corn, half-harvested, and a barn that looked more memory than structure. It felt like I was driving into a past my parents had tried to erase, slow, deliberate, stubborn. George's house hadn't changed a bit. White siding, green shutters, a porch swing that creaked with each breeze. I parked under the sycamore out front, shut off the engine, and sat for a moment with the paper crane still in my shirt pocket. The front door opened before I knocked. "You drive like your grandfather." "Slow enough to finish a thought," George called out, cane in one hand, the other resting on the doorframe. I smiled, walked up the steps, and took his hand. It was rougher than I remembered, but steady. "Still got that cane, huh?" he said, glancing at mine. "Guess neither of us runs marathons these days." "Guess not," I replied. Inside, the air smelled of old paper, dust, and Earl Grey. The living room was filled with books, stacks of files, framed medals, and photos of George in court, most of them with my grandfather. He motioned for me to sit at the dining table while he disappeared into the kitchen. A moment later, he returned with 2 mugs and set one in front of me. "You've got something," he said, not as a question. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder I'd prepared from the vault documents. Bank statements, letters, forged signatures, everything I could carry. I placed them in front of him, careful and slow. George opened the folder and read silently. His eyes scanned the pages without blinking. After 5 minutes, he set his cup down without sipping. "I warned your father, boy," he muttered. "I warned him 25 years ago." He leaned back, his breath catching in his chest. I didn't speak. Let the silence work. He flipped through more pages, then pulled one free, a notarized debt agreement with my name forged underneath. I knew this existed. I just never had proof. "What did you know?" I asked. George looked up. "After your accident, your father tried to file a guardianship petition, said you'd suffered permanent cognitive decline. He wanted control of all accounts tied to the Harper Trust." I clenched my jaw. "And he almost got it?" "He would have, if I hadn't blocked it. Your grandfather asked me to watch over things if something ever happened. I owed him that much. So I stalled, buried the petition under technical reviews, and made sure the paperwork never reached the court calendar." He took another sip of tea. "Your father didn't take it well." I remembered the year after the accident, lying in that rehab center alone. Mom said Dad was too busy managing the family business. He never visited once. "He told everyone, Jareth needs to learn how to survive on his own," I said bitterly. George met my eyes. "He didn't want you back, son. You were never broken. You were just in his way." That hit harder than I expected. George stood slowly and limped to the hallway. He returned with a black leather briefcase, the kind lawyers used in court back when paper still mattered. He laid it in front of me, then tapped the lock twice before twisting the key. "He left this with me years ago," he said. "Said, if that boy ever walks again, give him this." Inside the briefcase was a stack of land deeds, properties I didn't know my grandfather had owned. On top of them, a cassette tape in a clear case labeled EH, Final Recording, and underneath that, a notarized legal clause. Transfer of assets conditional upon my voluntary action as an adult in sound mind. The irony twisted in my chest. They'd tried to prove I had no mind left, yet here was a clause requiring exactly that. I stared at the documents for a long moment. "This gives you control," George said gently. "Real, legal control, if you pursue it." "But it'll destroy them," I whispered. "Everything they've built, their businesses, their standing, their friends." George didn't flinch. "So what? They built it with your name, with your silence, with your pain." I looked out the window toward the sycamore. "I don't want to become what they are." George nodded. "Then don't. But remember, letting them keep breaking others because you're afraid to act isn't mercy. It's surrender." My fingers found the paper crane in my pocket again. I turned it over in my palm, then set it gently on the table. "I just don't know if I'm ready to answer that yet," I said. He didn't push, didn't prod. Instead, I stood up, walked out the front door, and made my way down the steps. The sun was high now, glinting off the lake beyond the tree line. I walked down the path toward the water, stopping just at the edge where the ground turned soft beneath my boots. I stared at my reflection. Not the boy who'd left this town. Not the man my father pretended I'd never become. Just me. And I was still standing. Said the next morning, I woke up before the sun had fully cleared the treetops. I didn't sleep much, not because I was restless, but because clarity had a way of keeping me alert. I shaved carefully, steamed the wrinkles out of my one good suit, and tied my grandfather's navy blue tie, the one with the tiny eagle pins. The air outside smelled like rain was thinking about showing up but hadn't yet committed. This wasn't just any lunch. It was the weekly reputation brunch, the kind my mother organized religiously, held at the country club overlooking the ninth hole, where appearances mattered more than truth, and no seat at the table came without expectation. I pulled into the club's gravel lot and parked between a luxury sedan and a convertible that probably hadn't touched a dirt road in its life. My truck looked like it didn't belong. That was the point. As I stepped onto the stone patio, servers in starched white moved briskly between tables, balancing champagne flutes and fruit platters. A jazz trio played something smooth in the background, but it did nothing to soften the tension I felt crawl up the back of my neck. I spotted them at a long, white linen-covered table under a trellis, Dad at the head, Mom beside him, and my sister Emery laughing too hard at something her husband Elliot had just said. There were a few family friends too, faces I remembered from childhood barbecues and church auctions, the ones who'd all gone quiet when I was written off. Mom saw me first. Her smile was tight, more muscle memory than welcome. "Oh, you made it," she said, standing just enough to brush air kisses near my cheek. "You should have called ahead, Jareth. We didn't think you'd, show up." Dad didn't stand. He offered his hand like he was offering a tissue, limp, reluctant. "Well," he muttered, "I'll be damned." "Not today," I said quietly, shaking his hand firmly. He winced. Emery leaned in as I took my seat across from Elliot. "Just try not to make a scene, okay?" she whispered. I gave her a slow look. Wouldn't dream of it. The first 20 minutes were the usual dance. Small talk, passive digs disguised as concern. Someone brought up Elliot's real estate deal in Asheville, and Dad gushed about how he's practically running the Harper name now. Then the waiter approached from behind and set a glass of water in front of me. "Here you go, sir." The table paused. "Sir?" Someone snorted. I didn't see who. Another voice chimed in. "He thinks he still matters." Laughter rippled under breath. My jaw stayed relaxed. Then Dad stood, lifting his glass with a forced chuckle. "Well, while we're all here, a toast, I think. To resilience," he said, voice syrupy. "Some folks break and some just drift. But either way, we all learn our place." Polite laughter followed, mixed with nods from a few family friends who didn't know better. I stood, slowly, smiled. "Speaking of legacy," I said, "I actually brought something." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a leather folder. I laid it gently on the tablecloth, right between the fruit salad and the untouched scones. I clicked it open and pushed it toward the center. "Let's update the facts." No one moved for a second. Then Mom leaned forward. Dad followed. Inside were copies of the signed legal transfers from George Wells, notarized documents affirming full trust control, records of forged power of attorney attempts, and a formal revocation of parental rights regarding Harper assets. All clean, all final. Dad's glass froze midair. His eyes darted across the pages and he blinked twice like he couldn't quite focus. Mom went ghost white. Her fork clinked gently against her plate. She reached to smooth the folder flap and paused when something small fluttered into view. The paper crane from the vault. It landed delicately on the edge of the document stack. Her breath caught. I saw recognition in her face. Memory. Guilt. How did you, she started. I cut her off. "You built a kingdom on my silence," I said quietly, but clear enough that the neighboring table stopped chatting. "I'm done being your floorboard." Dad opened his mouth, but no words came. He looked to Elliot, then back at me, as if trying to decide whether to mock or beg. Neither came easily to him. I didn't wait. As I turned to leave, I passed by Elliot. He looked smug, as always, until I leaned in. "You're standing on land you don't own," I said softly. "I suggest you get familiar with who does." I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need one. By the time I reached my truck, I could still feel their eyes on my back, but I didn't turn around. It was the first time in years my spine felt straight. That night, I got a message from Elliot. "You have no idea who you're messing with." The glow from the screen cut through the quiet of my living room like a blade. I set the phone down without typing a word. The room was still except for the low hum of the fridge in the kitchen and the soft creak of the dock swaying outside in the breeze. I leaned back, closing my eyes for a second. George's voicemail echoed in my mind. "Watch your back. They'll use the system before they use their words." He hadn't been wrong. But even knowing that didn't prepare me for what came next. By 8 a.m., I was halfway through my first cup of coffee on the porch when my phone buzzed again, this time from a blocked number. I let it ring. Then came the knock at the door. Two men in gray suits stood there, one holding a manila envelope. "Mr. Harper?" the taller one asked. "We're here on behalf of the court, temporary order. You've been named in a petition questioning the legitimacy of your medical and cognitive recovery." I didn't move, didn't speak. Just took the envelope and nodded. By the time they pulled out of the driveway, I'd already seen the attached summary, a complaint filed by an anonymous party backed by a corporate medical consultant, suggesting I'd exaggerated or faked my recovery for financial advantage. There were blurry records, cherry-picked charts, and even a claim that my signature had changed post-therapy. It was absurd, but it was official. The kicker: a temporary freeze on all disbursements from the trust, effective immediately. And then, the vultures came. The news alert came through just before noon. Miracle recovery or calculated fraud. Harper Legacy heir faces questions over sudden re-emergence. I didn't even recognize the photo they used. It was an old one, taken during physical therapy when I still had the brace. My inbox flooded. Neighbors accidentally passed by more than once. And at 4, the director from the community center called. "Jareth, given the coverage, we're going to pause your guest speaking engagement this weekend, just until it's cleared up." I told her I understood. She sounded embarrassed. I didn't blame her. That evening I sat on the porch, same spot where I'd sipped coffee 12 hours earlier. The lake was calm now. I stared at the mug in my hand, gone cold. Beside it, the small folded paper crane sat quiet, wings curled slightly from the humidity. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was only useful when I didn't speak, when I just kept my head down and let others define my value. The silence settled into my bones like fog. Then, a ping. It was a voice memo. From someone I hadn't heard from in years, Cody Willis. He'd interned at the firm back when I was still on the board, walked with a limp, wore oversized button-downs, and carried more doubt than confidence. He must have found my number somehow. I pressed play. "Mr. Harper, you probably don't remember, but you were the first to tell me I was more than my limp. You said they fear what they can't pity. I still hear that in my head every time I walk into a room. Don't let them steal what you earned. Not again." I didn't move for a beat. Then I stood. I didn't cry. I didn't clench my fists or scream into the sky. I walked inside, rolled back the rug in my study, and lifted the hatch I'd reinforced beneath the floorboards. From the locked safe, I pulled a thick envelope marked with the initials FR. Inside, timestamps, medical scans, sworn affidavits from 3 independent doctors, and a video diary I'd recorded through every milestone of my recovery, dated, watermarked, and notarized. Alongside it, a USB containing a full forensic audit of every financial transaction Elliot had touched in the past 6 months. All of it quietly compiled by a specialist I hired the month I re-entered the trust, just in case. I powered up my laptop. Typed one name into my encrypted messenger: Sam Rourke, former investigative journalist, old friend of my grandfather. Owed him a debt, never forgot it. I sent one line: "Time to repay what you promised him." Then I dialed my attorney and scheduled an emergency hearing. Friday. First slot on the docket. The courthouse was quiet when I arrived, still wrapped in the soft gray of morning fog. I wore the same suit I'd worn to the brunch, same tie, same shoes, but I walked differently. Inside, Elliot was already seated at the petitioner's table, flanked by his attorney and a woman I assumed was his expert. He smirked when he saw me. I said nothing, just took my seat and waited. When the judge entered, I stood, calm and composed. My attorney began, but when it came time, I rose and addressed the court directly. "Your Honor, I've submitted authenticated medical files, third-party evaluations, and a continuous recovery log, including footage and timestamps that fully validate my physical and mental health. I also present evidence that the allegations against me were submitted through a shell consultant, whose firm is partially owned by the petitioner's wife." The courtroom stirred. Elliot leaned toward his lawyer, whispering harshly. Then he stood, looking directly at me. "This is a circus," he said. "He's manipulating the narrative." I cut him off. Quiet. Controlled. "You thought I was playing checkers," I said. stepping forward just enough so only he could hear. I built the board. He froze. The judge didn't look at me, didn't look at him. She just turned a page on her bench, took a breath, and then looked straight at Elliot. You might want to sit down for this. As the judge didn't blink. Her eyes stayed on Elliot as if weighing something far heavier than just evidence. The entire room was still. No scribbles from the stenographer, no coughs from the gallery, just the buzz of tension stretching tighter by the second. She tapped her pen once against the bench, then said, "Let's proceed." My attorney rose. He walked the court through every piece of the record, the time-stamped videos of my recovery, the medical reports, the audit trail. The handwriting experts confirmed every form submitted under my name bore my genuine signature. One by one, the doubts Elliot had planted were uprooted and tossed aside like old weeds. Then came the witnesses, 3 separate doctors, a therapist, even the neighbor who'd seen me hauling firewood during my first winter back at the lake house. Each confirmed what I already knew. I had rebuilt myself inch by inch. No shortcuts, no scams. When my lawyer finished, he sat without a word. I looked across the room at Elliot. He wasn't smiling anymore. His posture slouched slightly, but he still had that glint, like someone who hadn't played their final card. And sure enough, he stood. "Your Honor," he said, his voice a little too smooth, "before this matter is closed, I'd like to submit one more document, an amendment dated a week before my grandfather's passing. It explicitly states that Jareth Harper was to be removed from any claim to the estate." Gasps rippled through the room. Even the bailiff looked startled. The judge narrowed her eyes. "Mr. Carlyle, are you suggesting this is a valid postscript to the will?" "Yes, ma'am," he replied, lifting a leather folder. "We just received it from a private storage company my grandfather used. It was under a sealed deposit." He handed it over. I didn't speak. I didn't flinch. The judge reviewed it silently, then passed it to the clerk for scanning. I could hear murmurs behind me, doubt creeping back in like a draft through an old window. But I knew better. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the same folded paper crane I'd carried for months now. It had been there since I left the hospital. The edges were worn soft, but I never once considered throwing it away. I stood. "Your Honor," I said calmly, "may I present one more item as well?" She gave a cautious nod. "This crane was given to me by my grandfather the week before he died. I always thought it was just a keepsake, but it turns out it holds more than that." I pulled out a small keychain flashlight, the one Grandpa gave me years ago. Said it was for night fishing. What I didn't know then was it had a UV setting. I clicked it on and ran it over the wings of the crane. Gasps again, this time sharper. Across the paper, glowing faint but clear under the blacklight, were the words, "If they ever come for what's yours, this proves what's mine is yours." Pop. The judge sat forward, brows lifted. My attorney submitted the crane and flashlight to the court officer, who brought them forward for inspection. Forensics reviewed the handwriting under magnification. They compared it to Grandpa's journals. Handwriting slants, pressure, signature loops. It was real. The amendment Elliot had presented, forged. Confirmed by the court's forensic team within the hour. Elliot's face turned a shade I'd never seen on a human before. His attorney leaned in, whispered something frantic, but Elliot's gaze was locked on the judge. She stood. "This court recognizes the crane message as a valid personal confirmation of intent. The forged amendment is hereby dismissed. All trust privileges are reinstated to Mr. Jareth Harper." She paused. "And charges will be filed against Mr. Elliot Carlyle for submission of fraudulent documents, attempted estate theft, and obstruction." I didn't gloat. I didn't even look his way again. I just buttoned my jacket and walked out into the fading afternoon. It was quiet outside. A light breeze tugged at my coat, and I took the long way to the parking lot, around the oak trees out front that Grandpa always said reminded him of strength. Deep roots, bend, don't break. I drove back without turning on the radio. No celebration music, no calls to friends, just the road and the soft sound of my breathing. When I reached the lake house, the sun had started its descent, turning the sky to copper. I poured myself a coffee, not because I needed it, but because that's what I did every time I needed to sit with something too big for words. I settled into the porch chair and stared out at the water. They didn't want me until they needed what he gave me. But now, I finally understood. It was never about the house, not the money, not even the name. It was about whether I believed I was worthy without having to prove it. The wind shifted. A knock sounded at the side gate. And I turned, and there stood a tall, older man in uniform pants and a weathered cap. "Mr. Harper?" he asked. "I served with your grandfather. Name's Roland. I just wanted to tell you. He used to say you were the strongest one in the family, not because you stood the tallest, but because you didn't need to stand to carry anyone." My throat tightened. I nodded, unable to say much. He tipped his hat. "You did right by him, son." As he walked away, I looked down at the crane again, now resting on the table beside me. And as the sun sank into the lake, I realized some wounds don't heal. They evolve. It did. The air was cooler than usual for a spring evening, the kind of cool that made you pull your sweater a little tighter without thinking. I sat on the porch, nursing the last bit of coffee in my mug, watching the breeze stir ripples across the lake. That's when I saw her car. It slowed to a stop at the gravel edge of the driveway. She didn't get out right away, just sat there, both hands still on the wheel, staring through the windshield like she was debating whether to knock or turn around and disappear again. When she finally stepped out, I hardly recognized her. Mom looked smaller. Her hair was no longer dyed and styled like it used to be, just pinned back simply, streaked with gray. Her coat hung loose on her shoulders like she hadn't eaten properly in weeks. The woman who used to walk through rooms like she owned the air was now just a tired mother standing at the bottom of my porch steps. I stood slowly. "You lost?" She looked up, tried to smile, but it didn't land. "I didn't come to fight," she said quietly. "Just to talk. May I?" I nodded once and stepped aside, holding the door open without a word. We settled into the living room. She sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped so tightly I could see her knuckles strain. "I've replayed that day in the hospital 1,000 times, she began. "The things I said to you, what we allowed Elliot to do. Jareth, I don't know how to make it right." I didn't interrupt, let her speak. "I've lost everything. Friends, family, the house. Even your father refuses to speak to me. Elliot won't return my calls, probably trying to figure out who to blame next." She looked around the room. Her eyes landed on a photo of me and Grandpa, taken the week I moved into the lake house. "I thought we were protecting something. Legacy, order, the family name, but all we did was destroy the one person who was actually carrying it." Then she looked straight at me. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Jareth." "I don't expect anything, but if there's even the smallest part of you that wants to start over, maybe just coffee now and then." I leaned forward, resting my arms on my knees. "Mom," I said slowly, "you buried me before I died. You stood there, stone-faced, as I begged to be heard. You let them erase me like I was an inconvenience." She dropped her gaze. Her fingers trembled. "I dug myself out of that hole, alone, without your hand or your voice. And I don't need you to crawl in after me now, asking me to pretend it never happened." She started to speak, but I raised a hand. "I forgive you," I said. "I mean that. But I won't come back to what used to be. That family. That version of us. It's gone." For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of the clock ticking on the mantel. Then I stood, walked to the kitchen, poured her a cup of coffee, and brought it back. "Here," I said, "let's sit for a few minutes." Quietly. We drank in silence. She left not long after, didn't cry, didn't plead, just nodded once before walking to her car. And that was enough. 3 weeks later, I stood in front of a modest crowd at the community town hall, Some wore suits, others came in flannel shirts and worn jeans, veterans, single parents, folks in wheelchairs, people who knew what it meant to be forgotten. Behind me was a new sign, the GW, Wells Legacy Foundation. For every life, someone tried to write off too soon. I cleared my throat and stepped up to the microphone. I know some of you have heard parts of my story, I said, but this isn't about me. It's about something my grandfather once told me, sitting on this very porch. The world will try to measure you by what you lack, but real worth, that's in how you treat others when you finally have something to give. I paused. There were years I thought revenge would heal me, that if I just proved them wrong, loud enough, it'd make everything right. But I've learned something else. It's not about revenge. It's about never letting anyone feel what I once felt, like their life ended before it even had a chance to begin. Applause wasn't loud. It was quiet, respectful, the kind that sticks with you. As people lined up to shake hands, share stories, or sign up for the Foundation's programs, I noticed a small boy wheeling himself through the crowd. His dad walked beside him, gently steering. The boy reached me, handed me a folded piece of paper. It was a crane. Inside the wing, scrawled in shaky pencil, were the words, "Thank you, Mr. Jareth." My throat tightened. I closed my eyes. "Pop," I whispered, "we're just getting started." That night, back at the lake house, I sat again on the porch. The sky above was quiet, stars just starting to blink into view. A cool breeze rolled in off the water. I looked out over the lake, the same water I'd once thought I'd never cross again. "I used to think strength meant standing tall," I murmured, "but real strength is standing firm even when the world wants you to crawl." And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone anymore.